Arunima, it's a pleasure to have you with us. This is a session that I've genuinely been looking forward to, right? And there's nothing better to have a woman leader, with us, and be discussing more about how the organizations are going to be built in future, right? I very firmly believe that women have a very, very large role to play. I think we're going to talk more about that. But I think we'll also talk about, what 2020 has done and, how things are going to shape up beyond 2020, because the consumer landscape is kind of changing, which essentially means that, the responsibility at the hands of human resources department and organization is going to be, and learning and development is going to be very, very different from what it was, right? I think with that context, right, we will first, we'd love to know a little more about you. You've been experienced professionals, you've been out there for a reasonable amount of time. Tell us a little more about it, and then we dive into the session and the questions that we have for you today.
Sure. And excited to be here, Ashu. Thank you so much for the welcome. So I've been working with Times Internet for a good 7 years now, and my career has spanned mostly onto recruitment and across recruitment and learning and development. I would say the majority of my career has been into recruitment with organizations like IBM, Microsoft, United Health Group. And then when I came into Times Internet, I would say L&D was, L&D was something that happened, and now I absolutely love it. Right. And it's going to be close to 5 years that I've been around with training.
Wow, wonderful. Arunima, I would love to start this session by talking more about 2020, right? And I think that's a good point to start this conversation on, right? Because it's been an event which none of us planned for, right? It wasn't an event that any of us thought could ever come true, right? Possibly happened in a bunch of movies, and I think that's about it, right? But we were never prepared for it. Our systems were never prepared for it, right? Organizations were never prepared for it, right? Human resources were not prepared for it, right? Processes were not. So I think nothing was prepared for it, right? And all of a sudden it just brought everything to a standstill, right? And it just with very difficult answers, right? Or difficult situations, right? Which had no clear answers, right? How's 2020 been for you as a leader, right? Who literally went into a phase where there were no very, very clear answers, not a very clear picture, not a very clear position. I think everything got disrupted, right? So how's 2020 been in that context?
Disruption is the right word for it. In fact, the apt word for it. I remember when we started the pandemic, everybody suddenly started coining the term new normal. Right. And I personally was a little averse to it because I think I mentally wasn't ready to make the change. All of a sudden, when you're pulled up from whatever you think is normal, right, and you're told that now it's going to be the new normal, you automatically rebel.
Right.
Yeah. And that was the case with me as well. But when I looked at people around me, I realized everybody was going through some sort of a struggle or another.
Right.
Yeah. As an industry, we were all slowly, we had been taken out of our comfort zones. Right. As human beings, we always love to be in control. We've always loved to be in control. We like to think we can control everything.
Right.
But pandemic is something that has made us realize that there are forces which are much bigger than us in action. Right. So the realization of it as an industry, I think it took some time. And I also feel, my gut feel is that a lot of us are still going through that transition. Right. However much we say that there's been a transformation, there's been a change, this is a huge change management. Right. And it will take some time for it to completely sink in.
Sure. Very interesting. Arunima, one thing which is very important, right? And when you talk about, human resources, when you talk about learning development, which is a very, very critical side to the business, right? And business continuity, more importantly, right? And there are massive risks that you run, when it comes to business continuity, right? This has been a very, very unique situation, right? What has also happened is, so there are the visible factors are essentially the factors that are within the organization, right? Which are predictable factors that essentially has been what we've been designed for as an organization, right? The invisible factor is essentially, or what you don't control or what you don't know, is the consumer side of it, right? And essentially what has happened is that the consumer side has gotten disrupted in a big way, right? In terms of their savings, in terms of their job continuities, in terms of the disposable incomes, in terms of their responsibilities, liabilities, so on and so forth, right? And that has made the consumer very, very unpredictable. While on one hand that has happened, On the other hand, what has happened is that all of us have been limited to just about a few screens, right? And there was like a lot of content for us to consume, right? And we were consuming content from the Indian market, we were consuming content from the international markets. That essentially meant that the exposure was of very different nature, right? And what that led to possibly is a very different kind of a consumer behavior, right? And I think things are,
Right.
it's going to start becoming clear as we go along. Another couple of months, possibly 2 quarters, 3 quarters. A lot of that will start to become a lot more visible, right? Which essentially meant that the product life cycles, right, are going to take a very different kind of a turn, right? So while we had, there was, a product when it was typically designed had a 5, 6, 7 year sort of a life cycle. Now it's going to shrink to almost a year and a half, too, right? So you're essentially now calibrating yourselves to a 18-month to a 24-month period, maximum a 30-month period, right? And the preferences are going to change, right? Fads are going to fly, right? It's going to become very, very different, right? In an environment like that, right? How does the responsibility, for example, how do you calibrate yourself as, say, somebody who's kind of leading that change in the organization, as somebody who's leading learning development in the organization, right? How do you calibrate for that? That's number one. Number two is, how do you think the organizations of the future going to look like, right? And that's more a fundamental question, right? What are your thoughts about that?
Uh, Ash, I'm glad you asked that, because one word that has made a house in everybody's mind with the pandemic, the term, it has never been more alive than now, which is FOMO, fear of
Right.
missing out.
Sure.
Right? All of a sudden, people are realizing that, and if people have woken up to the fact that if they do not get up to get up to mark or catch up to where the world is heading,
Right.
they are going to wake up one day and feel that they've been left far behind.
Mhm.
And it is a highly pressurized situation.
Sure.
Does it not create a stress in everybody's mind? It does.
Right.
As learning and development, as a person who's leading learning and development for the organization,
Right.
it is as real for me as everyone else. And in fact, more real, because then I also have the responsibility of getting my employees up to date with whatever
Sure.
is happening out there.
Right.
How do I understand what they need? How do I understand what upskilling a business needs?
Right.
I make it a point to talk to people in the industry to understand where the industry is headed. What
Right.
do they see? What are the changes that they see in their field? And when I say people, I don't mean just the L&D professionals. I also mean people who are outside L&D, because then it gives a very fresh perspective to how you are treating your own field.
Mhm.
How does a business view L&D? Where does a business want to be? What do they see as collaboration? When we talk about learning and development, collaborating or partnering with business,
Right.
what is it that it means to them exactly? So to answer your first question, the challenge is way more real and way tougher for me than it was back in 2019.
Right. Interesting. Anima, has your role changed, right? Has your role also become very ROI centric? Given that, given the kind of change that the industry is now going through, right? Are you also becoming part of the business process, right? Learning and development existed separately, right? It was looked at in a very different way. It was a cost center initiative, right? And here you are in a situation where, the only constant is human resource, right? And learning development is the only way you can actually bring them to pace, right? Uh, is your role evolving, or in organizations, is the role of learning and development becoming more, more integrated with the entire ops strategy? Is there an ROI that is getting established in the process? What are your thoughts about that?
I would say my role has definitely evolved. I can see that in the conversations that are happening with businesses.
Right.
For example, a training need identification meeting would, at one point in time in my career, would only be about these are the sessions we need, and that's all we require for the year. And maybe
Right.
sometimes we don't even need anything for the people. We are
Sure.
good as we are.
Sure.
Now it has evolved to a level where we're talking about what is it that each individual needs in a team. Where
Okay.
is it that they would want to get more information from?
Right.
Why do they think that, for example, why do they think a bunch of business, a bunch of design people would require to see business in a broader perspective? Just an
Mhm.
example.
Right.
Business people are feeling that their product and technology teams should question each other more. When
Right.
there's a product cycle happening, why don't the design, technology, and product people question each other on what the needs are? Why is it that you need a certain thing in a certain manner? These kind of conversations never used to happen, which means that business is looking at full-fledged upskilling of their teams, getting their teams to a level where they can actually compete in the, in the competitive market.
Interesting.
So to say. And to answer your question about ROI, measuring learning impact has suddenly become a very serious conversation when we are planning training interventions. So it's not just about planning it and getting it done. It's also about what are some of the things 6 months down the line that we can check in the business to see how much of what they learned today are they using. So I love these kind of conversations. They've definitely changed.
Very interesting. And is there like a very clear metric which is come into the picture, or is this still very
no, not
objective?
Right now. Not
right now. But do you see that happening as we go along?
I see that happening.
Yeah. And also, Arunima, one question that I have, right? And I think my sense is this is something which has become very significant in the process, right? Is that, if an employee is not, for example, performing well, right? I mean, this is a question that I actually would I had it reserved for later, right? And we can possibly cover it then as well. But given we are in a certain flow, I'd want to answer. I would want to ask you this, right? Is essentially that if there is an employee, right, who's been trained, who's been recruited, who's been trained, upskilled in the process to understand systems better, right, and still is not able to perform, is that a reflection? Have you become in a way responsible, or not you, but learning and development department is also now becoming responsible for that, say, non-performance inefficiency that exists in the system? Is there a certain is that a new way of looking at it, or not so much? Is that still responsibility of the business teams and, say, the product teams or whatever functional team that individual is a part of, right? Is that still a responsibility of them, or is there a responsibility which is now kind of shifting towards the learning development team as well?
I would say not totally shifting towards the learning and development team where our organization is concerned. It's more of a partnership that exists. When it comes to upskilling, when it comes to post assessments, how people are performing, but performance largely still rests with the business as of now.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to move a little away from the conversation, right? And I think we got a very serious tone of the conversation, but I'm going to go into a slightly more macro nature of our conversation, right? Of the points that are very important for many people who are going to be listening to this, right? Is that in a changed environment, right? You're working for an internet business, right? And I think internet business is supposed to be, or consumer internet business is supposed to be, most agile form of businesses, right? They're the most and the kind of data access that they have and the kind of understanding that they have the consumer is far superior than many other businesses, right? And I think many businesses can actually learn from such practices, right? What goes into creating a stellar team, right? And I think this is post 2020, right? So when you look at it as a professional today, right, that I have to create a winning team for an extremely competitive market, which is now very digital, very trackable, right? What are some of the things that go into creating that team, right? What is possibly the process that you would follow at Times Internet, and what you think are practices that many others can learn in the process?
For me personally, one criteria that hasn't changed even now after the post-pandemic era would be the attitude of the person who I'm recruiting.
Sure.
That to me still is the most important, because the attitude tells a person whether they are ready for transformation, they're ready for change management, because all that will come. This is not the only change we are seeing. There will be many more. Maybe this is just a start. So that to me is the most important part of whatever we are looking at. The second, I feel, the one very important change that we also spoke about in the panel discussion is how ready is a candidate to be straight away put into the job the moment they are hired.
Sure.
How much of a time can a company afford to spend in training than they can do with the person joining right on the job and being productive, maybe from day 2, day 3, but definitely sooner than what they would have spent training otherwise. That I think the wait time or the patience of an organization to wait for a person to be productive might go down.
Interesting. Arunima, what I essentially meant, right? And I think I would love to, hear from a slightly more holistic way, right? So I think what you're telling me is essentially more about the candidates, who you're out there to sort of recruit, right? What I actually want to understand is that I mean, hiring is one part of it, right? You already have many people who are working in the organization, right? Upskilling is something that you highlighted, right? That it's become important that you upskill people. Okay. Now, given that we are essentially headed into an unknown, right? Where we really don't know how the consumer is going to be. I mean, we still know some bits of it,
Right.
but I think a lot of that is changing, right? Because there are many other systemic issues that are dictating the decision making of the consumer, right? Uh, a a winning team post 2020, what are some of the key characteristics that you think are going to be very critical uh, for that team to actually go out and win, right? And when I say win, is essentially perform exceptionally well, right? We say their competitors, peers, internal benchmarks that have been created. That's essentially what I meant. So what are your thoughts around it, right? So what are the key characteristics of a winning team that you think are going to be important in a post 2020 environment?
So technology or technical skills aside, Ashu, I think the key characteristics of a winning team would be characterized by how open their attitude is to change management. Second, how good are they in managing emotional intelligence or emotional quotient of a team,
Right.
and also about how open are they in understanding the changes that are happening and adapting themselves to the transformation.
Right.
It is an attitude like that would go a long way in ensuring that you have a winning team, because technical skills, any other skills would come automatically after that. But
Interesting.
how careful are you about your team's mental well-being?
Mhm.
How emotionally perceptive are you to your team, and how emotionally perceptive are they to you? And also understanding how good they are in their attitude, or how ready are they in their attitude. As for me, I think that would be those characteristics.
And do you think unlearning is going to be very important? I mean, from what we were set out for, right? And given that we're in a very new environment, do you think unlearning and upskilling will also play a very critical? I mean, we know it's going to play a very critical role, right? But I think how important is acceptance of all of this, right? Do you think acceptance is going to be a very major factor to be considered when you're looking at an individual, right? When you're looking at a construct of a winning team, right? Do you think acceptance will play a very large role? Because typically what happens is then when people are set into an organization for 4 5 years, you hit a certain point, right? There's a certain comfort that you have. I mean, here is a point which is kind of literally disrupted how the organization behaved, operated, right? That means that you will have to get out of that comfort zone, and you'll have to unlearn and then quickly upskill yourself and then become part of the process, right? But many people are in denial, and I'm sure you'd relate to that, right? And that's a very big constant, right? How do you see that, right? How important do you think acceptance will play a role, right, in terms of how quickly teams and organizations react to situations?
Huge role. Like I spoke about myself, the very fact about coming to terms with the term new normal was a process
Sure.
for me.
Right.
Acceptance played a huge role there. Unlearning is a huge role. Unlearning for teams who have been doing things a certain way for years and years.
Sure.
All of a sudden, for them to adapt to a faster, more digital way and keeping themselves up to date every single day to where the world is heading is going to be a huge challenge. So,
Right.
unlearning is definitely required. Acceptance is a huge part of that unlearning, that I
Right.
need to unlearn for myself to learn more.
Right.
Those two are very connected to each other.
Interesting. Arunima, I have a particular question on leadership, right? I think leadership is going to be very important, right? I think mentorship is going to be very important, right, within organizations, right? I don't think mentorship was looked at in the kind of sense, in the way that I think is going to be needed now, right? I think every leader, irrespective of how small a team that he or she is leading, or how large a team are they leading, their role is going to be that of a companion. Will that evolve to be that of a mentor, right? Rather than being a boss, right? I think those days are possibly gone, right? Which essentially means that they'll have to be extremely balanced in their approach. Where on one point they have to be constant source of enthusiasm and energy. On the other hand, they'll have to constantly be very, very calm and assuring, right, to their teams. Do you think that's going to be a very different balance to achieve when it comes to leadership? How, for example, are you, preparing your leaders to handle such complex situations?
It's definitely changed, Ashu.
Sure.
Uh, Being able to see your team, okay, in one way or the other. Okay,
Right.
it was never a case where we cannot see our teams even if we want to.
Right.
Being present in a room where you have the energy of the business, where you know the energy of the business, where the vibe of the business is heading,
Right.
is very different to sitting in your house and then talking to your people and understanding.
Right.
Leadership across the world, on and off, was used to such things. A lot of our people were remote working. A lot of people in the world had never even met their managers.
Right.
But as you said very correctly, the role of a so-called boss is changing, and how.
Right.
Okay, because
Right.
one very important connection, or one very important characteristic that a leader has now to develop, is emotional intelligence.
Right.
It's very, very important for them to connect virtually to a team, feel the pulse of the team, at the same time understand that business, it is business as usual. In fact, it is more than business as usual now.
Right.
So when we talk about the role of a leader, I think they need every bit of help that we can give them.
Right.
Expecting them to lead their teams, be a mentor, at the same time be a companion, be emotionally intelligent as well, look after the
Right.
mental well-being. I think that's expecting a bit too much without extending our help to them. We
Right.
are all humans.
Absolutely.
Some things come inherently to us, some things don't.
Right.
And the things that don't, I always feel very strongly that that is where the role of a learning and development team, or the business partnership role, that is where it comes into being. That's where
Absolutely.
you consult your leaders to ask what they want, to
Right.
understand what are the requirements they have in this fast changing world.
I think it'll be interesting to hear some anecdotes, right? Maybe the funny ones that you had in the process, right? Because I know it's a very difficult job, right? Somebody who's leading business, right, typically comes from a very different zone, right? I think their orientation is that we are the revenue chasers, right? We have to be geared in a certain way. There are certain things that we have to do, right? And I know it makes your job very difficult. But what are some of those practices that, like, for example, uh, you would have, right, certain processes that you would have implemented to ensure that leadership is getting tuned in a certain way.
One thing that has been that's come up as a need more than usual is the need for coaching.
Sure.
And when we say coaching, there's been a interesting twist to it. And that's what I remember very distinctly, that coaching suddenly has not come up as a need because a person needs coaching. A leader thinks, or maybe a person up there thinks, that their leaders are already there.
Right.
What is it that an organization or a business can do to help them stay there and
Right.
go even up? In my previous experiences, all my exec level coaching have come up out of a need for something. Either we
Right.
want them to reach the next level, or there's something just not there, so let's fill in the gap. Right now, what we're seeing is, and there's not been a lot of trend in it, but there has been one or two. I think that's good enough a change
Right.
to talk about it. Is when these are very sensitive cases where people are saying, my leader is right there. I love the way he or she works. However, I want to ensure that the company invests in them to ensure that they stay their way and enhance their skills further. I think that's a great thing to have, to
Right.
coach somebody, to help them continue on that path, rather than think about coaching only as a remedy.
Interesting. So what you're essentially highlighting is that has to be now onwards, right? It has to be a more ongoing process, right? It has to happen at very, very defined intervals. It has to have a very clear metric of measurement, or a measurement metric, right? And I think I kind of understand where you're coming from, right? I think the systems are dynamic. The times are very, very dynamic, right? Uh, Arunima, one thing which is very important, right? And I think in today's environment, I think this is something that everybody is kind of talking about it and thinking about it, right? Is the analytical capabilities and the entrepreneurial mindset, right?
Right.
And promoting entrepreneurship, right? because I mean, gone are the days where you could have one data and was a predictable, and like we discussed, right, there's a predictable market, and there's a predictable outcome, and you're essentially just optimizing for that outcome, right? There are not too many things that you need to do around it, right? But now, given that the environment has changed, right, you'll have to have people who are very analytical, right? Who are decisive, right? Who can think on their feet, who can contribute to teams, right? I think that is something which is a lot of organizations are kind of talking about it, right? Do you think the need of the hour will be to have such people, such caliber in the teams? How are you shaping it up? Uh, within many teams that you operate within the, say, the Times Internet group in the current in the current design.
See, the need of the hour is definitely being more analytical, being more decisive. But I also feel that there are only so many skills that a person can have.
Right.
Beyond that, you just become a repository of a lot of things. However, you don't really use them as much.
Right.
So yes, skills like data science and analytics and everything, they're going to play artificial intelligence for that matter. They're going to play a huge role going forward. Do we recognize which of these skills are the most important in the organization, and how do we analyze which businesses need them the most, which people or which section of the employees need these the most, and help them upskill? That's the work that a learning and development team should ideally be doing with the business, talking to them, understanding more about where the business wants to go going forward, and what are those skills that are required. Analytical skills are definitely required in everyone, but does everyone necessarily have those skills? Can they be developed? To a certain extent, yes. Some people don't, and they would be having some other skills to compensate for those.
Sure.
Right. But then I think there is, if you do a consultative, if you have a consultative conversation with business, you understand that there are some common waves across the organization that you will need to develop as times go forward, and analytics is definitely one of them.
Sure.
So
very interesting. Arunima, how about intrapreneurship, right? How about entrepreneurial mindset, right? How important do you think that is becoming?
That's become the need of the hour, I would say, because part of the pandemic, a lot of people have had to think a lot independently than they used to.
Right.
Okay. There was a set system in place. There were people you could go to for help. There were budgets available. There were funds available, investors available. All of a sudden, an entrepreneur has to think in a way where they are doing more than what they were doing back in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Developing that mindset amongst our people is very important, because then that help them think in a broader perspective for their businesses as well.
Right.
Even when it comes to our business heads.
Right.
How is it that you take the business 5 times forward, or you take the business the next 5 years, where you want to see the business? If
right.
you are not if you're going the same way, it's not going to work anymore.
Right.
They definitely have to look at ways and means to which they can develop their own businesses in innovative ways that were never thought of, because competition is way higher than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the strangest thing is that the competition has developed in the last 1.5 years only.
Right.
I mean, way more than what it used to be. You have people thinking innovatively. You have people thinking far beyond their means, because they know what they were used to is not going to work anymore.
Right.
So developing that mindset amongst our people is also very important, because you have to be independent at the end of the day to see your business forward.
Very interesting. And are there any specific initiatives that you've put together to ensure that, or is that over the part of the overall piece that we just spoke about, right? Which is constant coaching, right? At regular intervals. Is that integrated within that structure, or is there a separate piece of exercises and a module that you've created to build that kind of a mindset?
Integrated within that structure, and one of the major focuses that we have for this year is developing our people managers.
Okay.
And developing them in a way that goes beyond the conventional modules of people management that we've so far been seeing them do.
Right.
Okay. We believe that, and we believe that because it's 50, let's say, for example, it's 50 managers, but how many people are those 50 managers impacting? It may be 100, it may be 150.
Right.
So if we develop our people managers in a way that prepares them for what this world is going to be tomorrow, day after, a year later, I think the job is half done, because that just creates a ripple effect in the organization. And the
Sure.
end result for us, and the end intention for us as an organization, is that our managers speak the same language.
Mhm. Very interesting.
It's one of the other initiatives that we have this
Very
year.
interesting. I don't know. How about cross functional growth? Right. I think many people have realized that their calling is into a different area, right? For example, or as they, when you're evaluating those people, right? Say across your processes, or the business leaders in the organization feel that this is an individual who can go on to play a critical role in another department, right? In a complementing role, stuff like that, right? How relevant, or how dynamic has that become? And is there a mechanics to sort of do that now more formally in a more institutionalized way, where people can have a cross-functional growth? They can be moved into departments depending on certain matrices of their performance and stuff like that. Is that part of the new normal?
Uh, Cross-functional growth has become important. We would like to do more when it comes to cross-functional in our organization. However, we are now open to, and we have been open to, looking at people who come from various backgrounds, come from different backgrounds, to be working in other businesses. So at least that avenue, that mental avenue for people is open. We have a process around it. Okay. When you talk about cross-functional growth, I think the time where a mindset where it was about, you have to come with a certain skill, and if you don't, then I don't really want to look at you, I would rather hire somebody from outside, that has undergone a change. One, because it could also be because of resource crunch. It could also be because various industries or various organizations are facing a budget crunch when it comes to hiring new people. But whatever the reason is, at least it has opened people's minds in thinking about, let's look at people within the organization.
Right.
I think that's a very important part of the entire process, the mindset opening. And then if your mind opens, you anyways find out avenues to help it.
Interesting. Arunima, one thing which has also happened, right? Something that we were discussing in India Education Futures as well, right? While you were there with us, is the changing role of academia, right? And in academia and industry existed in two independent silos, right? I mean, there has been interaction, but that interaction was, was essentially operating in a certain comfort zone, right? Academia had its own comfort, and industry had its own comfort, right? And like I said, right, we were essentially optimizing, because we knew the end goal, right? We were optimizing for the end goal, and I think that was a process which was very, very clear. Uh, what has happened is that post 2020, right? I think that entire thing, and like I'd highlighted, right? The hypothesis is that that the entire consumer landscape is going to change, right? For the reasons that we've discussed. Do you think that the role of academia and industry is going to change, right? Industry possibly will not have the time to bring freshers to the fore, and have them give them the comfort of say the first 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, maybe a year, for them to adjust into the environment, and then start contributing towards the larger goals, right? Short term and long term of the organization. Do you think that this is bound to change, or this should change, out of the compulsion that we are in, right? And you would expect, or organizations would expect, that people who are hired from academia start to contribute literally in the first, post the fortnight of onboarding, or maybe the month of onboarding, right? So those comforts are going to go away, right? What do you think is the new paradigm of relationship between academia and industry?
Ashu, personally, I've always maintained the stance that academia has to prepare people for the industry faster than they are.
Sure.
And this stance I've maintained before COVID as well. It hasn't changed. I see a lesser I see a lesser lag time that industries can afford to spend
Right.
on people once they are hired. They want them to be productive right away.
Right.
While I understand that there are challenges in the same, however, we have systems in place to ensure that, that's where the organization system come into place, where they say that, okay, fine, we are here to support you, when you are hired and you are expected to be productive. You're not
Right.
alone in your struggle in case you're struggling. But does the academia need to change? Yes, it does.
Right.
It definitely needs to make people more skill worthy and teach them modules and skills that would prepare them for what the industry looks like.
Right.
More of practical, more of relevance to what the industry wants right now, incorporate that into the modules so that people get a taste of what life is going to be beyond academics.
Right.
Because right now, sometimes to a lot of people, it's quite a shock. They're taken aback. This is
Right.
not what we expected, or this is
Right.
not what we were taught. So teach us.
Right.
I expect you to teach us. The point is that that patience that an industry had may not exist anymore.
Right.
We're not here to teach you. We are here to see how productive you are.
Right.
In a very positive way. I'm not seeing this in a negative way. So yes, academics definitely has to change, needs to change.
Uh, I have a question, Arunima, around the growth of an employee in the organization, right? But before I ask you that, right, what is also becoming very complicated, and I would love to hear your views on this, right? Is that I earlier the relationship between an employee and organization was very different, right? There was a certain longevity that one could sort of have, right, in that relationship. There's a certain predictability in that relationship, right? And the underlying factor of that was that and because there was a consumer landscape, right? And that consumer landscape was kind of predictable in whatever ways it was. Uh, that has now changed, right? And we've been discussing this all throughout our conversation, right? Do you think the engagement and the relationship that employees and organizations have is bound to change? Do you think there is going to be more very focused functional relationship, very output driven relationship, right? And organizations are going to have a higher churn? Or do you think they'll still be able to preserve a culture where there are more and more people who will still be able to stay put with an organization for a much longer time? Uh, do you think that's possible, or do you think that's a misnomer, given the situation that we're in? I think we're in a very different kind of a relationship ecosystem now. What are your thoughts about it? I mean, you've been there, so,
Tricky one.
for
That's why I'm smiling.
yeah,
It's quite a tricky one. The relationship of an organization and an employee will not change when it
right,
comes to engagement, when it comes to taking care of the employees more
right,
so
right,
than they used to. And we can already see that mental wellness is a huge topic amongst organizations today.
right,
Huge. Uh, in diversity and inclusion has become huge.
right,
And I'm talking about the post-pandemic era.
right,
Pandemic, it was anyways important.
right,
All of a sudden, organizations have become very conscious to the fact that they need to look after the employees.
right,
Now, that is a very separate aspect to the
right,
churn.
right,
Okay. I don't see a churn, and this is personally my opinion. I
right,
don't see a churn happening because people don't feel engaged enough.
right.
There will still be a churn happening because they will get a better opportunity outside.
For
I
performance issues.
also I also feel that an organization will look at churn in a different way going forward.
Mhm.
Gone are those days where a recruiter would look at a resume and ask a person being extremely judgmental about how many organizations has that person worked in.
Right,
When you come to a gig economy, when you come to hybrid working, I mean, these are terms we hadn't even heard of.
right,
Consulting for that matter. We are way more open to understanding that a person may not be working with the same organization for an average of 5 to 6 years like it used to be.
right.
And 5 to 6 years is also a lot that I'm talking about.
It's a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah.
So engagement will not go down.
Right,
No, that's a very, very sensitive part. It definitely will not go down because employees now need to be way more engaged than they used to be. There's a difference in looking at a person every day or seeing a person every day and just assuming they're engaged enough.
sure.
Now you don't see a person.
So I think that's a very interesting point that you highlighted, right? And how about letting go of employees, right? How about letting go of them, right? Organizations were a little more patient, right, when it came to retaining people, right? There was a certain investment that had gone in, right, to bringing them to pace, and having them in the organization, having them going through many trainings. So there was a certain investment that happened, right? It was unfortunately not never a very explicit investment, right? There was always an implicit investment, across many matrices, right? But there was, organizations were patient, right? There was a certain war chest that they had, right? COVID is, of course, put a massive dent to that war chest. That's number one, right? Number two is, you're essentially headed in a very uncertain zone where you're not very sure, how consistent is going to be your cash flow, right? Which essentially means that there is going to be a very clear cut pressure on performance, right? Which means that the organizations will have to let go very fast, right? So so do you think larger organizations, who essentially work big time on, building a culture, giving that comfort to an employee, saying that, listen, you're a part of it, we will take care of you, for whatever time you're going to get your relevant chance, right? A lot of that is going to go away. Do you think that's a phase that we're headed into, or possibly there is going to be a certain courtship before it translates into being a marriage, right? Is that how you think it's going to play out, right? Like you highlighted, right? Possibly a gig play, right, or a consulting play, that come and work with us for 3 months. Maybe we like you, maybe we don't, right? And we'll figure. Is that possibly how this is going to play out, right? Is that right, which is going to bring in a certain, a little more certainty about, performance issues, adjustment issues, learning issues, contribution issues. Do you think that's going to be the way it'll?
Industry is more open, Ashu, mentally.
Okay.
Yeah. So saying that inviting a person to be a consultant or, do a part-time kind of a work with them, I do see that happening. I
Hmm.
see that happening because then an organization has way more time to assess what a person actually wants.
Right.
Is that person a culture fit in whatever shape or form they're working at that point in time?
Hmm.
Uh, do they actually see them adapting to the overall culture if they think of absorbing them later?
Right.
So I think mental openness to various ways of working
Sure.
has increased manyfold. And I've heard this in so many of these conferences that I've been attending the past 1.5 years. People are talking about various ways of working in a way that it's very fresh and welcoming to hear industry experts.
Interesting. How do you institutionalize this, right? I mean, it's a very difficult one. I know it's a very difficult one. I think everybody's trying to sort of find answers to it. There are no perfect or right ready answers, right? And I understand your challenges, right? But what I essentially also want to understand is, how do you institutionalize this, right? Is there a way you can institutionalize this, or is this something which is going to take a shape as we go along, right? Because this was not something that we were prepared for.
Going to take a shape as we go along, Ashu. There's no said way of doing it. And
Hmm.
having said that, I would also say there would still be those organizations which would see it's easier said than done.
Absolutely.
Okay, years and years of
I
doing
I
something,
completely relate to the challenges that you're going
isn't
through, right? And
it?
I think,
Yeah.
and your calmness, Arunima, I think is absolutely phenomenal, because I understand where you're coming from, right? I think what organizations are grappling with, and essentially leaders like yourself are grappling with, is very unknown, right? Is not a familiar territory, and I can only relate with the challenge. And I know you're putting up a very different kind of a face. It's a very different calm that you're putting out, and I completely understand. So yeah, I completely relate with the issue
Yeah,
that.
I think that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's a very different scene. We haven't seen this ever before.
Right.
And it's like every day brings a new face to the economy that you've seen in a certain way till a few years back.
Mhm.
So a lot of organizations are going to try this to see if that
Right.
works for them.
Right.
Again, as I said, it's easier said than done. So it's also a mindset shift for the
Absolutely.
organization.
Right.
Are they ready to accept such people in the organization? Are they
Right.
ready to have them as consultants and then see how it works out for them? Or
Right.
would they still go the conventional way of hiring
That
them,
is,
retaining them?
and when you're saying that, I'm just kind of imagining it in my head, right? I think there's such trust issues, right? At a
Oh,
promoter level,
major.
at a colleague level, right? I think there's such trust issues, right?
Yes.
Uh, and I can only imagine how difficult it is. And yeah, like you said, right? It's easier said than done, right? I think it's going to be a difficult one in hand, right? As we
Right.
go along.
Right.
Arunima, I'm going to move on to the employee growth, right? We've touched upon it, right? We've talked about cross-functional growth. We've talked about some of those things, right? Do you think, how employees were looked in an organization, right? And there was a certain path that would, typically, be carved out for them, right? So you go on to do this and you get this and stuff like that, right? Do you think a lot of that is going to become very, very dynamic?
Definitely. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Definitely become more dynamic.
Very interesting. And I'd love a little more light on that, right? I think this was very sharp and very precise, right? But a little more light on it. Do you think that somebody with, say, a 5 years experience can actually supersede somebody with 8 years experience, right? Because that is something which is, I mean, there is a certain, like I said, there's a certain path, right? People go on to graduate to other levels with certain experience and performance, right? But do you think in a new normal, many things like entrepreneurial mindset, their contribution to the overall growth of the organization, performance, how they conduct themselves, right, how they evangelize many, many causes within the organizations, how they stay put, right? So it's going to, how emotional intelligence for that matter, right? I think it's going to be a combination of all of these factors, and people who are possibly relatively new in the organization can actually go on to lead people who've been in the organizations long enough, right? Do you think that's something that we could see as we go along?
I think we're going to see a lot of interesting people joining organizations with
Okay,
skills which supersede the ones that are already in the organization.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's going to be one major reason of why we would be seeing a dynamic growth.
Hmm.
Because what we need to also understand is that when you're in an organization,
Right.
there's a certain wall around you. Okay, you sometimes do not understand what the industry outside
Right.
is looking like.
Right.
However, when we have someone coming from outside, they are way more prepared to what an organization actually needs
Sure.
or what it doesn't need.
Right.
With so much social media Ashu, there is ample information of what an organization is doing right now
Right.
and where they want to go. There are enough panel talks happening for that organization's leadership. People can hear them, understand where they're going, and individuals right now are way more aware and wanting to upskill themselves even before the organization hires them.
Interesting.
So you come with a certain skill that is not present in the team at all. You are bound to supersede them. You're bound to just go ahead and understand, maybe establish yourself as a not supervisor, but a manager, or let's say an analytics person who is maybe leading a bunch of
Right.
other analytics person.
Right.
So
Interesting.
yes, skill will play a major part in this.
Interesting. Arunima, what are your thoughts on mental well-being? Right. I think teams have gone through a massive amount of stress, right? And I think this is now stress that's becoming a part of our life, right? Because organizations are now sort of gearing themselves to the new normal, right? They're going to really very defined performance expectations, right? Which essentially means that on one hand, while of course organizations clarity will come to fore, the market is still kind of adjusting and readjusting itself, right, to the new normal, right? Which essentially means that there is going to be a certain friction, which is bound to happen, right? There is little that you can bar it. I mean, it's not something that you really can do anything about. I think there will be that, and there will be more of that, right? Do you think the role, while of course there is an output expectation, it will also become very important to ensure that there is mental wellness is evangelized in the organizations, employees are taken care of in a very different way, right? Do you think that's going to become part of the process within organizations? What are your thoughts about that?
Brings me back to the question that I spoke about when we were
Sure.
talking about engagement. That the engagement that an industry has with its employees will not go down. In fact, it will go up.
Right.
Mental well-being is a topic very close to my heart
Sure.
because our organization does a lot when it comes to mental well-being,
Okay.
and it has become a major part of an employee's life cycle here to ensure that they're doing well.
Okay.
Uh, Sensitizing our managers, ensuring that there are avenues where our employees can talk, ensuring there are topics which are spoken about openly.
Right.
That's the way you advocate that if you have a problem, we are here to listen to you. I
Sure.
think that's the first and foremost part of it. Overall, as an industry, even when I read articles, even when I hear people talking, mental wellness has become a part and parcel of our lives today.
Right.
And though every one of us may not be doing great at it, at least the good part is that we know there are people out there to help us,
Right.
which
Right.
wasn't the case.
Very true.
It was looked at as a stigma till a few years back.
Very true.
Now, counseling services, counseling helplines suddenly have a lot of people calling them.
And I think what you're also highlighting is that there's a renewed sensitivity in organizations, right? So of course,
Yes.
while organizations are trying to sort of comprehend the market side of it, I think there is a renewed sensitivity that they have around mental wellness, right? And I think organizations have kind of realized, right? Of course, while there are challenges, right? I mean, there are many aspects that we talk about: skilling, upskilling, right people, right fitment. I think we talk about a lot of these complexities. I think one possible constant or a common constant across, I think, many organizations is essentially people, right? And I think
Correct.
organizations. Arima, I want to specifically, we're towards the end of the conversation. Uh, I wanted to actually bring it up uh, at this point, right? Is how do you go on to cultivate more, women leaders, right? And I personally come from a school of thought where I believe that unless you have many women leaders, right, it will not be a safe ecosystem for women, right?
Correct.
It's important to empower them. It's important to give them that space to operate. And I think we'll possibly lay a foundation to a more responsible society, right? Responsible ecosystem, right? While of course education is doing its bit, right? But I think empowerment is going to play a very critical role, right, in that scheme of things, right? What are your thoughts about that, right? What are some of the things that you are, say, evangelizing within your current setup, or you think should be done at a larger level, right? What are your views on that?
And a topic close to my heart. And I think cultivating women now, and I won't come to the word leaders right away, because what I think, Ashu, is it's an interesting observation, and I'll take you a little back, and excuse me if my answers are a little long-winded, but just wanted to say this, that when it comes to academics and you look at a college result or a school
Right.
result, anything, when you look at the names of the people out there, a lot of
Right.
people, a lot of students are females,
Right.
a lot of students are girls. And then it's the same case when it comes to colleges. You
Right.
hear that girls have consistently performed better than the boys this time, CBSE, ICSE, IB, wherever. Where are those women when we come to our industry?
Right.
Where have they gone?
Sure.
Right? We have lots of them when it comes to our junior population, when
Right.
they start off. Where do they go while climbing up, while going up there?
Right.
Okay. Uh, and at the same time, let's also accept the fact that not every woman out there might want to become a leader. They
Right.
might also want to become an ally, a
Right.
sponsor, a supporter. There are so many roles that we can
Or a
play,
contributor.
or a contributor.
Right.
Exactly. Uh, right now, I would say in post COVID times, it has become all the more sensitive because a lot of women have, in fact, the proportion or percentage of women having lost their jobs or having given up their jobs to kind
Right.
of balance their household and all the stress that's going on has
Right.
been far greater than the men.
Right.
So it becomes all the more important for the industry to nurture the women who are there in the organization.
Right.
To for them to understand what is it that they exactly need.
Mm-hmm.
What is the upskilling that they need
Right.
specifically?
Right.
What is the ecosystem that they're living in? Is that
Right.
supportive enough for their upskilling? And when I
Right.
say ecosystem, I talk about the home as well,
Right.
because that's a major factor of why there are fewer women up there.
Right.
So an organization, and I do not talk only about ours, I think I'm talking on a very holistic,
Absolutely.
holistic platform here,
Right.
that it's become a very important part as of today in the pandemic era to ensure that our women are out there feeling safe in an organization, feeling good about what they're doing.
Right.
They're in the right roles and they are being upskilled for what the role requires them to be. And
Right.
they're also made to understand. And I might come across as, a lot of listeners out there might find this a little against the, conventional philosophies that go, but they also need to understand one thing very clearly, that you do not have the pressure to climb up the ladder all the time.
Right.
That's a major thing that women have to understand. You might just be happy doing where you are in your space.
Right.
And industries need to understand that. Organizations need to keep them happy where they are. Do they have a fulfilling job? Do they have a fulfilling role? Are they
Right.
doing everything that they're capable of doing? Is their
Right.
capability being utilized completely?
Right.
These are questions that organizations have to ask themselves now more than ever.
Right. Interesting. Arunima, I think that was a lovely answer that you gave, right? And I think there's a renewed responsibility, right, towards ensuring that it's a conducive ecosystem for women. And like you said, right, my personal belief is that I think women make extremely sincere colleagues. They make extremely un or in corruptible resources, right, and extremely focused on the cause, right. And I think they could actually go on to build a very strong, consistent foundation to organizations, right? Which are extremely focused on very dynamic deliveries. That's my sense of it, right? So I kind of completely second you. I think there's a lot of focus that needs to be done in that side of things. Arnima, my last question in this conversation, and I've had a lovely conversation with you, right? My last question with you is, how do you encourage creativity in organizations? What are your thoughts about that? Because that's something which is very, very critical, right, going forward, right? And when I say creativity, it could mean from a problem solving standpoint, it could mean from say contribution standpoint, it could mean just at an efficiency level. So how do you encourage creativity? How do you institutionalize creativity when you are in an organization which is very focused on delivery, right? What are your thoughts about that?
Times Internet, or the organization right now I'm working in, has given me the independence to be creative and experimental in my role. And I'm forever saying that to everybody. It's an
Right.
organization that allows you to be agile. It's an organization that will listen to you if you want to do something new.
Right.
And when it comes to L&D, it has really helped because then you think beyond the conventional ways of learning and unlearning,
Right.
both. Uh, when it comes to various learning topics, we ensure that we understand the needs of the business first.
Right.
Relevance has become a key word for us.
Sure.
While being relevant, how do you figure out various ways of teaching people, various ways of helping people learn,
Right.
especially when it's a challenging environment of learning from your own home?
Mhm.
It's not always conducive to learning.
Right.
But then what are the various ways that you can engage them in? Do you want to build a simulation in a learning program? Do you want to do an online theater to help them set their goals? Do you want to build a module in for a manager which has a lot of engagement in between, in the form of WhatsApp groups,
Right.
in the form of a dedicated mentor, in the form of, let's say, action learning plans that they present in front of someone else, that keeps them engaged all the way? So
Mhm.
a classroom session is not a classroom session anymore.
Right.
It has to be creative for a person to actually learn something out of it. If there is a business who wants to learn something around, let's say, for example, script writing
Sure.
or filmmaking. Okay, who are the people you talk to in the industry? How do
Right.
you get them that rich experience, industry relevant experience that helps them learn in a far more creative way? Because that person was not going to be a typical trainer only. That person is also getting subject matter expertise in a creative way with themselves.
Right.
So creativity is a huge factor today in the industry to help people learn what they're learning and retain it better.
Right.
Retention is a major thing. I mean, you've taught them. How do you expect them to learn, or remember, recall, so to say? Content recall, content retention. What are the various ways you can think of where people can actually learn that?
I think
So yeah.
Arnima, I think that's a very interesting point that you highlighted. I think also in a way what you're highlighting is that it's going to be a responsibility of the organizations to create an environment people can actually learn a lot of creative ways, which possibly or creative aspects that could be cultivated, which help them solve problems in office, right? And I think that's something that I
Correct.
I hear
Yeah.
you saying, right?
Yeah.
Arnima, it was a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time out. It was a fantastic conversation. Hopefully we're gonna catch up very, very soon, and
Thank you.
looking forward to a very exciting round of conversations as we go forward, right? But it was a pleasure to have you. I so wish to see many, many women leaders like yourself, at the helm of affairs, taking charge, right? Uh, and I think becoming a very critical part of the entire process as we try and solve for the new normal, right? Like we discussed right at the outset, right? So it was a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much, Arunima, for joining.
Thank you, Ashu. It's been an absolute pleasure. I don't know where 1 hour went, honestly. Yeah, it was extremely spontaneous, and I love that. So yes, I
Well,
hope to
listen,
catch up with
I
you again soon.
absolutely I look forward.